they have always, in my experience, been there. Atléti till I die. It hasn't needed um, times of dearth, um, times of famine for Atleti, for them to actively declare themselves as the rebel club, the opposition club. It's an identity that they have happily grabbed. And Atleti, of course, I don't know the geographical location or ages or interests of people who watch the football weekend, but the Vicente Calderon in its day was a really grandiose stadium, but you described it correctly. It was in a slightly less affluent area of the city. It had, if not a dual carriageway, a motorway built around one side of it, which would never have been permitted around the Santiago Bernabeu. So, it wasn't architecturally, it wasn't sort of fully complete or covered. It was a very, very different edifice. But the people that went there, 70s, 80s, 90s, without question, either were more lower middle class or working class, or considered themselves to be. They would definitely be the club that you handed down from, and excuse me, it's not listing women as firmly, but back decades ago, it would still have been the case that this was something that was very much handed down from grandfather to father to son, or grandfather to son. Increasingly in the modern age, that would have been grandmother and daughter and granddaughter. And one of the things that really struck me when I first came to Spain for football in 1982 and moved here much later was that the audiences in the stadia were significantly different to what I'd encountered in the UK. Many, many, many more women. I've always thought that's a good thing. I've never been able to understand why it should have remained a male-dominated, male-only environment. But the sentiment about Atleti has always been, well, certainly in my lifetime, we suffer. And the sentiment for Real Madrid has always been, in my lifetime and before, we win, we dominate, we are the elite. I would have said that your average Atleti fan arrived over the decades by public transport, by foot, by a motorbike, and the Real Madrid fan, and they would maybe be carrying a can of beer or smoking cigarettes. The average Madrid fan would probably be arriving on four wheels, would be smoking a cigar, might be dressed in a more pijo style. Pijo just means, what do you call it in, there's a word in American culture for pijo, which is a kind of posh kid. It's a small word. It'll
Like
come
a
back to me,
dandy or
but
something.
no, 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 no. A dandy is really showy. It's not quite yuppie, but preppy. A sort of preppy kind of, a sort of maybe an Ivy League look. The you could take a bet that if you went to a football ground 40, 50 years ago, the ones with the jet back, oiled, slicked back hair that curls around here, stop, I'll be a Madrid fan. Um, Jumpers slung over the shoulder and tied here. I'm generalizing. But when you go time and time again and you listen to the way that the accents sound, the behavior is, and that's why to this day, and I don't think this is a new phenomenon. You mentioned the Vicente Calderon, which is now demolished and sold, and there are hyper expensive. It's a little bit like what happened to Arsenal's old ground, Highbury. The housing now surrounds a relatively small Vicente Calderon park with the centre circle, in theory at least, still preserved there. Um, and if you went there, it was a noisier, more visceral, sometimes rougher experience. They have always, in my experience, been there. Atleti till I die. Every game is a war. You dedicate yourself, and particularly your throat, force as it may be, to the team. Whereas at the Bernabeu, there are moments of gigantic noise, gigantic loyalty and ecstasy. But broadly, if you wanted to thumbnail sketch things, it's this is our version of the opera. Entertain us, and then we'll get behind you. Then we'll roar you on because we are Real Madrid, and we should be winning, of course, and we should be destroying opponents. And every country will have their version of that. I think. Well, I mean, I'm reaching here a little bit, but maybe we're making a comparison between the era when the Cowboys were known as America's team,
Hmm.
or the 49ers at their absolute peak, and maybe what the Pack were thought of as something of that nature, or the
Hmm.
Cleveland Browns. Does that make some sort of sense as a rough comparison?